The ancient Egyptians believed that every single night the sun died, and that without the right rituals, the right prayers, the right people doing the right things in the dark, it would not come back. This is not a mythology about gods who live forever in comfortable palaces above the clouds. This is a mythology built by people who looked at the universe and saw something that wanted to unmake them, and decided to fight it anyway, every single day, for 3,000 years. Now, before we dive in, I want to share something personal. Of all the world's mythologies, Egyptian mythology is the one that genuinely unsettles me in the best possible way. There is something about it that feels different from Greek or Norse myths. It feels older, heavier, like it came from people who looked at the universe and weren't entirely sure it was on their side. The gods aren't charming or relatable in the way Zeus or Odin might be. They are immense, ancient, and often terrifying. And yet threaded through every story is this fierce, almost stubborn insistence that order can be maintained, that chaos can be held back, that light will return after darkness. I find that deeply moving. These weren't stories told for entertainment alone. They were told by people who genuinely believed the sun might not rise tomorrow unless someone fought for it. That sense of cosmic urgency makes Egyptian mythology feel, to me, like the most human of all mythologies, because it was built by people who were truly afraid and chose to face that fear anyway. Think of this as a cozy storytelling session, perfect for relaxing, winding down, or simply letting your imagination drift as you listen. Whether you're settling in for a peaceful evening, doing some work, or simply curious about these ancient tales, feel free to get comfortable and let these stories carry you back 5,000 years. Now let's start at the very beginning. Part 1. The birth of everything, Noon and the primordial waters. Before anything existed, before light, before land, before even the concept of time, there was only Noon. Not darkness exactly, and not water in any sense we would recognize. Noon was the infinite, formless, churning void that the ancient Egyptians imagined as a boundless ocean of chaos, still and depthless, stretching in every direction without end. Noon had no edges, it had no bottom. It was not empty, it was simply undifferentiated, everything and nothing at once. Imagine the ancient priests of Egypt describing this to a congregation by firelight thousands of years ago. They didn't say the world was created from nothing. They said it emerged from everything, from a primordial potential so dense and so complete that creation was almost inevitable. The Egyptians, more than most ancient cultures, seemed deeply aware that order and chaos exist together, that the world is not simply made, but constantly maintained, always at risk of slipping back into that original formlessness. From Noon, the first and most essential of all Egyptian gods emerged. His name was Atum, and his emergence was one of the most dramatic creation stories in human history. Atum arose from the waters of Nun through an act of pure will. In some versions of the story, he appeared atop the first mound of earth, called the Benben, which rose from the depths the way a sandbar rises from a flooding Nile. This image was so powerful to the Egyptians that it inspired the shape of the pyramid itself. Every pyramid in Egypt was understood, on some level, as a recreation of that first sacred mound rising from the primordial waters. Atum was complete unto himself. He was the totality of existence compressed into a single divine being, and in one of the oldest creation accounts from Heliopolis, he accomplished the next step of creation entirely alone. From himself, Atum brought forth the first divine pair, Shu, the god of air and light, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. With Shu and Tefnut, the concept of duality was born. The universe could now contain opposites, and those opposites could interact, which is the very engine of creation. Shu and Tefnut, wandering through the formless void, eventually became separated from Atum. He sent his eye, a powerful, independent, divine force, to search for them. When they were found and returned, Atum wept tears of joy, and from those tears fell the first human beings. It is a remarkable detail. Humanity, in Egyptian belief, was not an afterthought or a servant class created to do the gods' labor. We were born from divine relief, from the emotion of reunion. We were, quite literally, tears of joy. Now, a quick word before we continue. What you just heard was the very beginning of everything, and it deserved the time it got. But Egyptian mythology is vast. Thousands of years of stories, hundreds of gods, and an entire civilization's worth of meaning packed into every myth. We could spend hours on each chapter and still not reach the bottom of it. So from here, we move with purpose, not rushing, but choosing. Every story ahead is real, every detail earned. We're just carrying them the way the Egyptians carried their dead, carefully, with everything that matters and nothing that doesn't. Part 2. The ENNEAD, the gods who built the world. From Atum's first act of creation came a chain reaction. He produced Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. They in turn produced Geb, the earth, who lay flat and vast beneath everything, and Nut, the sky, who arched her star-covered body over him, her fingertips on one horizon, her toes on the other. Between them stood Shu, arms raised permanently, holding earth and sky apart so that existence had room to breathe. These five, together with the children Nut would soon bear, formed the ENNEAD, the 9 foundational gods of Egyptian religion. Those children, however, nearly never arrived. Ra, the great sun god, placed a curse on Nut. She could not give birth on any day of the existing 360-day year. Enter Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, who challenged the moon to a wager, won enough moonlight to construct 5 entirely new days outside the calendar, and handed the problem neatly to Nut. She gave birth once on each of those stolen days, first Osiris, then Horus the Elder, then Set, who reportedly tore his way out rather than wait, which in hindsight was a warning, then Isis, and finally Nephthys. 5 births, 5 days that shouldn't exist, and from them all of Egypt's greatest stories. Part 3. Re's Golden Age and how humanity ruined it. In the beginning, Ra ruled everything, gods, mortals, sky, earth, and for a time it was genuinely good. He crossed the heavens each day in his solar bark, a blazing celestial boat, and the world below was abundant and full of divine presence. The Egyptians remembered this as their golden age, when gods and humans shared the same world without separation. Then humanity decided to conspire against Ra. He was growing old, his power fading, and people began to plot. Ra's response was not subtle. He sent Sekhmet, a lion-headed goddess of pure destruction, to deal with the situation. She dealt with it so enthusiastically that Ra realized he was about to become king of a completely empty planet. He had 7,000 jars of beer dyed blood red and poured across the fields. Sekhmet mistook it for an ocean of blood, dove in, drank until she passed out, and woke up as gentle Hathor. Humanity survived barely. Ra, exhausted and deeply disappointed in everyone, withdrew into the heavens and has kept his distance ever since. Part 4. Osiris, Isis, and the murder that changed everything. Of all the stories in Egyptian mythology, this is the one that mattered most. The story that explained death, resurrection, and kingship all at once, and that Egypt returned to for 3,000 years without ever growing tired of it. Osiris was the ideal king, wise, beloved, civilizing. His wife Isis was the most powerful magician in existence. His brother Set was chaos, not merely evil, but the raw desert energy that exists in opposition to everything fertile and ordered. Set wanted the throne, so he had a chest built to Osiris's exact measurements, threw a party, offered the chest as a gift to whoever fit inside it perfectly, and waited. Osiris climbed in. The lid slammed shut. The chest was sealed with lead and thrown into the Nile. Isis searched through the world, found the chest in Byblos, where it had become encased inside a palace pillar, and brought her husband home. But Set found the body while she was away, dismembered Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across all of Egypt. Isis and her sister Nephthys searched the country piece by piece, reassembled him, and Isis, using magic no other god possessed, breathed enough life back into Osiris to conceive their son, Horus. Osiris did not return to the living world. He became something far more important: the Lord of the Dead, the King of the afterlife, and the eternal promise that death is not destruction but transformation. Part 5. Horus, Set, and the world's worst legal dispute. Horus grew up in hiding, raised in secret in the marshes of the Nile Delta, sheltered from the uncle who would have killed him on sight. When he came of age, he challenged Set for the throne of Egypt. What followed was one of the longest, most chaotic divine proceedings in the history of mythology. The gods assembled a tribunal. Arguments were made, tests were conducted, and at some point the whole circus relocated to an island with a standing order to ban women from attending, specifically to keep Isis out, because she kept winning every argument. Isis disguised herself, sweet-talked the ferryman, and walked right in anyway. Ra sulked. The goddess Neith sent a written message from her temple, essentially telling everyone they were being ridiculous, and to give Horus the throne, adding that if they refused, she would make the sky fall. They took a few more years to decide anyway. 80 years total. That is how long the most powerful divine beings in existence took to agree on basic succession law. In the end, Horus won. Set was not destroyed, chaos never is, but was assigned a new role, standing at the prow of Ra's solar bark each night, fighting Apep, the great serpent of chaos, so the sun could survive until morning. Even the villain had a function. Horus became pharaoh, and from that day forward, every pharaoh was understood to be Horus living and Osiris upon dying. The myth didn't just explain the world, it ran the government. Part 6. The DUAT. What waited after death. The Egyptians were not vague about what happened when you died. They mapped it in extraordinary detail, first in the pyramid texts carved into royal tomb walls, then in the coffin texts, then in the Book of the Dead, a papyrus scroll the wealthy brought into the grave like a travel guide, because that is exactly what it was. The DUAT, the underworld, was a vast kingdom of 12 regions, one for each hour of the night Ra spent journeying through it. Souls navigated gates, named guardians, recited spells, and ultimately arrived at the judgment hall, where the heart was placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter, the soul passed into the field of reeds, a paradise that looked exactly like Egypt, but better, where the dead were reunited with everyone they had loved. If the heart was heavier, it was immediately devoured by Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, and that soul simply ceased to exist. Not punishment, not hell, erasure. The Egyptians considered that the worst possible fate and structured their entire moral lives around avoiding it. Part 7. The Gods. A few worth knowing. The Egyptian pantheon ran into the hundreds, but a handful stood at the center of everything. Thoth, ibis-headed and endlessly patient, was the inventor of writing, the god of wisdom and the moon, and the one the other gods called when they needed someone to actually solve a problem. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, guided souls through the DUAT with quiet, steady hands. The Egyptians saw jackals haunting their cemeteries and chose to read this not as scavenging, but as guardianship, which says something beautiful about how they understood the world. Hathor, goddess of love, music and motherhood, was warmth and abundance in divine form, and also, on her worst days, Sekhmet. Both lived in the same body. Bastet, the cat goddess, embodied protection and grace, and her devotees were so serious about it that harming a cat in ancient Egypt was considered one of the gravest crimes imaginable. And underneath all of them, woven through every story and every ritual, was Maat, not quite a goddess with adventures of her own, but the principle that made existence possible. Truth, justice, cosmic balance. She was the reason the sun rose, the reason the Nile flooded on schedule, the reason society held together rather than collapsing into chaos. Every Egyptian, from farmer to pharaoh, understood their daily choices as either upholding Maat or threatening it. Honesty was not just a virtue, it was load-bearing. Part 8, the eternal cycle and how it ends. The deepest idea in all of Egyptian mythology is not a story, it's a structure. Where other mythologies build toward a finale, a final battle, a twilight of the gods, a clean ending, Egyptian mythology builds toward a cycle. Creation is not a one-time event. It happens every morning when Ra rises, every year when the Nile floods and retreats, every time a soul is guided safely to Osiris, which is itself a repetition of the miracle Isis performed over her husband's broken body. The world is not something that was made. It is something being constantly remade every single day by gods and humans working together to hold chaos at bay. Apep, the great serpent, the force of absolute unmaking, attacks Ra's bark every single night without exception, and every night Ra survives. Because Set stands at the prow and fights, because Ra keeps moving, and because the sun rises again. There were prophecies of a true ending, a final moment when even Osiris and Ra would dissolve and the waters of noon would reclaim everything. But even that was understood as a before, not a conclusion. The cycle doesn't break, it breathes. Part 9, the legacy. Egyptian mythology has been ending for 2,000 years. The old temples closed, the hieroglyphs forgotten, the priests gone, and it still hasn't finished. The scales of justice in every courtroom in the Western world trace back to the weighing of the heart, the practice of embalming, the keeping of cats, the idea that a righteous life earns a peaceful afterlife, the image of a God who dies and is restored to offer resurrection to others, a story the Mediterranean world knew intimately long before Christianity arrived. All of it runs deeper than most people realize, seeded into the foundations of civilizations that thought they had moved on. Egyptian mythology tells us that chaos is real and permanent, that order is fragile and worth protecting, that the people we love can be lost and, if we are brave and clever and refuse to give up, sometimes found again. It tells us that death is a passage, not a wall, and it tells us that the sun only rises because someone somewhere is still fighting for it in the dark. That idea is 5,000 years old. It has never stopped being true. Thanks for spending your time here. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of Egyptian mythology, I'd love to hear which god or story resonated with you most. Let me know in the comments below. Until then, stay curious. I'll see you next time.